G'day. Welcome to Improving Alignment, Focus and Feedback with OKRs, or Objectives and Key Results. So we're here to talk about what they are, where they came from, how they work, and importantly, how they work in SAFE. So my name's Mark Richards. I'm a SAFE Fellow from Australia. The longer I've been working with SAFE, the more obsessed I've become about helping my customers move their conversations from outputs to outcomes. So I've done a lot of work with metrics. In my work with metrics, I found OKRs. So let's start off by having a look at the concept of the OKR completely outside SAFE. John Doerr wrote a book called Measure What Matters. It's basically the Bible for OKRs. There are some shorter options. But if you really want to know them, this is the book. And he has my favourite definition. It's a management methodology that helps ensure that the company focuses efforts on the same important issues throughout the organisation. So they were invented at Intel by Andy Groves back in 1971. He originally called them IMBOs, or Intel Management by Objectives. So they were triggered out of the MBO movement. Andy did a lot of work to go, how do we get something better? And we got IMBOs. Now, John Doerr was working at Intel during the Andy Groves era. He then went into venture capital. He started pitching this idea of OKRs to all of his venture capital clients, one of whom eventually was Google in 1999. So Google adopted them then. They're really the company that made OKRs famous. It has been the primary tool of strategy definition for Google ever since. If we look at today, and we think about perhaps Dean's keynote of the 10 trillionaires we might work for one day, you'll notice a few familiar names there on that list of the companies that are using OKRs right now. So the O in OKR is the objective. It's what you want to do. What do we want to do? Why do we want to do it? The KR, how will we know whether we've done it? So KR is key result. It's measurable, and it helps me to measure, did I get my objective? Now, the first thing we're looking for with objectives is a focusing tool. What are the needles that are most important to me to move? There are many things I could be achieving. What's most important to achieve? It's a focusing tool. So a recommendation, 3 to 5 objectives. Now, Intel used them all the way from company strategy to personal. Literally anywhere you were in Intel, you would have personal OKRs, you would have OKRs for your department, overall company strategy OKRs. So I like to experiment on myself before my clients. When I read about OKRs, I went, I'll try them personally. Been using them personally for about 3 years now. And this year I've been lucky enough, I'm taking a sabbatical. So I'm not doing a lot of client work. I'm doing a lot of researching and writing for a book that I've been threatening to write for about 5 years. So when the start of the year happened, of course, I sat down to say, well, what are my objectives for the year? Now, when I'm doing personal OKRs, I think through 4 dimensions. Physical, what's going on with my health. Emotional, social, family relationships. Writing, of course, my book. And my business, which needs to still be there after my sabbatical. So every quarter I sit down, I write some objectives. This is actually last quarter's objectives. So that part's fun. It gets a little bit less fun when you start to think about how to measure it. Key results are the magic of OKRs. I've set an objective, how will I know when it's done? And I want to know objectively, not subjectively. So I'm looking for every objective to set about 3 key results that are measurable, gradable on a scale, usually 0 to 1 or 0 to 100%, and outcome focused, not activity focused. All right? I don't want to know how much activity I did, I want to know what outcome I achieved. All sounds good. And then you get an objective like this. How do you measure that? Luckily, I've had a bit of practice. Right? When you set out to find a way to measure something, you'll find a way to measure it. And every time you go through the cycle, you get a little bit better at that. What it sets you up for is feedback. It's a great exercise setting OKRs. Really good focusing, really good discussion, amazing discussion when you think about measuring it. But the magic happens when you actually do the measurement. That's where you get feedback and learning. Now, there's a wonderful quote. It says, it's better to aim too high and miss than to aim too low and hit. It's very much what Google preaches with OKRs. Their recommendation is pick an objective you've only got a 50% chance of achieving. If you get 60 to 70, great. You're wanting to keep stretching yourself with your OKRs. And then you get to measure. So this is my last quarter's OKR measurements. And you'll notice when you look there, you see a couple of greens and a red. And interestingly enough, the red is in writing. I took this year off to write a book. About 6 weeks into the year, I discovered that actually having a personal life and seeing my family more than on Saturday and Sunday was actually a more important part of the year for me than writing a book. So sometimes what happens when you score is you understand what your objectives really are. And you can look and you can say, what needs to change next quarter? Right? What did I learn from this? What did I learn about measuring? Did I set the right objective? Did I set the right measures? If I scored low, was it something I chose? Was it something I didn't choose? Create the feedback and the learning. There's a reality, though, that not all goals can be aspirational. So Google talks about committed goals and aspirational or stretch goals. Take an example. I do a lot of government work. When new legislation's about to happen, there's no stretch or aspiration about being compliant. Right? We've got to set a line in the sand, we've got to be there. That's a committed goal. A lot of our goals can still be aspirational. So we're just recognising there's two different types. The other thing to understand is you need multiple time horizons. So typically, most organisations, they run an annual cadence where we're setting annual strategy. We run a quarterly cadence where we're asking ourselves the question, this quarter, what can I do to move myself towards my annual objectives? Based on what I learnt last quarter, based on the current conditions, what are the most important things that will move me towards my annual goal? So that's focus and feedback. Alignment doesn't really help very much when you're thinking about personal objectives. You've got to be starting to move to organisational at that point. And I believe that OKRs are a call and respond tool. As a group of senior executives, we set a strategic OKR. Reduce operating costs by shifting customers from call centre to digital channels. Quite a common one these days. What I'm now looking for is each part of my organisation to say, given our competency and our condition, what can we do to contribute towards the overarching strategic objective? Right? So the executive OKR is a call to action. Different departments, different responses. What can we do to contribute towards the broader goal? So it creates, I think of it as the virtuous cycle. Right? The beginning is a call to action. It invites a response. As those responses come in, we share them both up and down the organisation and sideways across the organisation. And we align. We then measure, reflect and learn, next set of OKRs. So it's a slightly elongated PDCA cycle. The biggest difference I see to PDCA here is the alignment step. PDCA is usually a local loop. Right? OKRs extend it to add an alignment check and go a little bit more global. So let's move to SAFE. We had a list of a lot of companies on a slide before who are using OKRs, but that's actually a pretty short list. Certainly what we're seeing in Australia is virtually every major organisation in Australia is adopting OKRs for their business strategy definition. They are becoming the new language of business strategy. And if we think about SAFE 5.0, finally we're talking about business agility. If we're talking about business agility and we're talking about strategy, surely we should use the same language for strategy. I can use them all over SAFE. I can have portfolio OKRs, I can have program OKRs, I can have feature OKRs. They can impact me at every level through multiple dimensions. So I'm going to walk you through a kind of top to the bottom. If you used OKRs everywhere obvious in SAFE, what would it look like? And we'll begin, of course, at the portfolio level. We know every good portfolio begins by defining a portfolio vision. We create a portfolio canvas defining our current state, we model scenarios, we define a future state portfolio canvas, and pretty hot off the press, SAFE now formally has OKRs. It is the new tool for strategic themes. As part of my portfolio vision, define my strategic themes as objectives and key results. Now, at this point, we get to where this was one of the hardest decks I've ever written, because I wanted real examples of OKRs, and every time I started to think, I thought of a client example. So we wound up with a pseudo-real example, which is a merger of about 5 of my clients. So imagine I had a digital portfolio. I might wind up with OKRs that look like this. We want to reduce operating costs by shifting from call center to digital channels. We want to become more relevant with millennials because they don't like talking to people. And we want to increase our share of wallet through understanding our customers better through data. I mean, pretty common objectives these days. You'll notice it becomes very real when we look at the results. It's easy to make the motherhood statements. How would we recognise it? That's actually the tough conversation. So if I've now got my portfolio with my strategic theme, OKRs, I can start to think about these as a call to action for epics. What big ideas do we have that could help us achieve those OKRs? Well, they turn up in the form of epics. We think we could do service interventions for customers at risk of churn. We could understand our complaint data better. We could use AI to drive upsell recommendations. All pinning back to this triggering call to action of the portfolio OKR around leveraging customer understanding. But we can go another level. Because we know as soon as we have an epic idea, we create an epic statement or an epic canvas. And we notice in that epic statement that we've got a business outcome hypothesis. Whoops, get my clicker to work the right way. I can express that as OKRs. So we're going to follow the thread of this epic, service interventions for customers at risk of churn. So churn, customer who's going to leave my company, go to a competitor. How can we find those customers likely to churn and save them? So we dig into the objectives here, work out whether we can automatically identify customers who are at risk, then see whether we can enable our customer service staff to drive an effective intervention, and make it cheaper to save them. So most churn save activities tend to be, we'll give you a discount, we'll give you some kind of voucher. Can we do it without giving away money? All right. So I have portfolio OKRs, I have epic OKRs, but then I know my epic's going to go through an MVP lifecycle. All right, this great big idea. How do I test it? Well, I'm going to write an MVP. Really, the first thing I'd test here would be, can I create that model? I've got lots of very excited data scientists. Can we get it? So let's see whether we can get a model that's useful. MVP. Surely I could set OKRs for that. We know the purpose of an MVP is to test a hypothesis. Can we invalidate our product strategy before we move further? Be nice to define the rules right away. Okay? So it looks like we're going to build an MVP on historical data. We're going to test how accurately we'll predict churn events based on 12 months worth of history. And we'll see whether we can get information out of that that will actually support service interventions by our customer service people. Great, we're off to the races. When we finish our MVP, we have a moment, right? Pivot or persevere. How do I make that decision? Should be pretty easy to make that decision if I had OKRs. What are our OKR scores? Are they telling us pivot or persevere? Data-informed decision making. Well, let's go to the program level. So we know every good train begins with a train vision. Fill out an art canvas. One-day workshop. Train leadership. Business owners. What is our shared vision for this train? Well, you notice there's a success measures box that's part of the vision. How do I know if the train's succeeding? So for years, we used to define KPIs then. We found moving it to OKRs has been really useful in terms of crystallising. Train's not successful if it ships features. Train's successful if it achieves outcomes. I've got one release train that I've been working with for a couple of years now. They've never shipped more than 50% of their committed features. As a delivery guy, it drives me slightly insane. But they had an objective that was set around reducing staff hours through process automation. 12-month goal, 400,000 staff hours saved. And every PI, they overachieved on that. We're never talking about, did we ship the features? Did we achieve the business outcome? So here's our theoretical train, data-driven intervention. Kind of obvious, it's going to be full of data geeks. They're going to figure out how to use data to drive this intervention. We dig a little bit into the objectives, moving from reactive to proactive customer service, improving service quality, improving our marketing, and then really down into the measurability for that first objective. So what we've got now is we've got another call to action and another response. Portfolio, OKRs, call to action. Formed a release train, part of our portfolio strategy. We pulled this release train together and we said, what's your shared vision? How will you respond to those portfolio OKRs? So it's a response. We can check our train for alignment. Now it's off to the races. We've got another bit of portfolio, which is lean governance. How am I going to know if that train's working? Or how they're doing on their OKRs? Can we do a OKR progress review every PI? But let's move another layer. So the art OKRs also serve as a call to action for ideas. What are the features that we could build that would achieve those OKRs? We know they're going to come from all over the place. And they're going to drop into our program backlog, into our funnel. And what do we do once they land in the funnel? Well, check for alignment. Does this feature actually move us towards our OKRs? But you've probably guessed we're not done. So we pick up our previous MVP, which is where a lot of our features come from, and of course we break it into features. use a feature and benefits matrix. Well, I think, say 5, we're moving from a FAB matrix to a BAF matrix. And we're going to find those features. What you find when you've got good OKRs at the higher level, it really frames your decomposition. Because now what I'm doing is I'm saying what features could achieve those MVP OKRs. And it falls out kind of logically. We're going to build a model and we're going to test what we can do with the model. So now I've got OKRs for features. I get to use them lots. When I'm out doing exploration, I want to test those OKRs. Right? We thought this was a good idea for a feature, predicted some results. When we're doing our customer and our user research, when we're looking at the market data, do our OKRs stand up? Or should we be changing direction on this feature before we go any further? Of course, when I build the feature, I should build in the measurability. It's not a feature if we can't measure the key results. And then when it's deployed, I've got to do my learning. Both the dev teams and the product management team should have access to all the key result data so they can study it, learn, improve their product strategy. So let's talk about PI objectives. So I think there are about 4 popular definitions for SMART. The safe one's not my favourite, but I have to remember that every time I sit an exam. And we've talked about SMART objectives for a lot of years. And I can't think about how many times I've talked about the difference between delivering features and committing to objectives. But if there's one thing I know in common everywhere is that people write terrible objectives. It doesn't matter how much you talk about the SMART acronym, then you see an objective. And, here's an example drawn straight from a past example from SAFE of some objectives that really aren't very smart. Teams committing to helping with the radar POC. Awesome, how? We get to the end of the PI. Did we do it? I got no idea. It's fuzzy, it's amorphous. It's amazing how often in Inspect and Adapt, the discussion is, what was that objective again? What do we mean? It drifts because we really struggle with them. Well, what happens if my PI objectives look like this? It's pretty clear what we're trying to do now. How are they going to help with the radar POC? Well, it looks like they're worried about emergency braking and collision detection. Very, very explicit what the help expectation is, and more importantly, what the outcome is. This is the thing I love about OKRs, is they change the language we talk. We don't want to talk about shipping software. We don't want objectives about shipping software. We want to talk about changing life for our customers and our business. And we want objectives that talk about changing life for our customers and our business. Naturally, the path you take with OKRs has you talking about business outcomes, not technology outcomes. It's just like a subtle rewiring that happens for people. So now I've got some slightly better looking PI objectives. Let's talk about Inspect and Adapt. The moment of truth. We've done our PI demo. Proof of concept with mock sounds. 3 months ago, you told us that would be a 7. What'd you think? 6. Why? It wasn't as exciting as I thought it would be. Yeah, it's a very subjective conversation. It's based on memory, interpretation, all kinds of things go into that. Feels kind of awkward. How about this one? Well, we had some OKRs. We did 0.75 on one and 0.69 on the other. So our score should be 0.72. There's no subjectivity now. We committed to an outcome. We measured how we did against that committed outcome based on agreed metrics. Now we've got a score. So speaking of inspect and adapt, let's talk about relentless improvement. So we know inspect and adapt finishes with identify improvement backlogs. So question for all of you sitting here today, what percentage of your improvement actions for inspect and adapt are actually fully implemented as intended by your release trains? So I'm looking for a fist of 5. We always follow through on everything from inspect and adapt. We never follow through on anything from inspect and adapt. Give me a show. It's good to see lots of honest people. Ones and twos is certainly my experience with agile release trains. Let me ask you another question. How would you know? I know the popular way I see for an improvement action to be closed, it's up on a Kanban somewhere. Some leader picks it up and says, yeah, done. Somebody else in the group goes, oh, what was done? We're done. Now, as part of my year of research, I got to go and strike an item off my bucket list and do a lean study tour in Japan. So we had Toyota Sensei's, we were in Toyota classrooms, walking through Toyota factories, and it was fascinating to see the reality behind all the books I've read. It was inspiring, by the way, really inspiring. I lost track of how many times they talked about data that week. The obsession with data precision at Toyota was unbelievable. To the sub-second for every operation performed by every operator in every plant. The amount of time they spent teaching us that just-in-time only works with effective forecasting and high-quality forecasting data. But one of the things that we talked a lot about, of course, was Kaizen. And we did a Toyota Kaizen simulation. It was very educational. I learnt that I would definitely never be trusted on a spot welding machine. But they set us up, very, very obviously inefficient process. And the first thing that happened was they handed half of us stopwatches. And they said, okay, before we can begin Kaizen, we need data. Take your stopwatches, time the process. Capture notes, let's run the process again. And we instantly wanted to start changing it. And our Toyota sensei would walk over and go, no changing it yet, just study. So we eventually had a whiteboard full of all kinds of data. And he said, okay, now what's your target condition? We want to start improving. No, what's your target condition? And so we looked and we went, okay, well, we think we could make it this much more efficient. He said, I don't care how much more efficient you make the process. I want to target about how much more profitable the factory's going to be. Because that changes the improvement. As we've been trying to make a process with 3 operators more efficient, where you could actually run it with 1 operator slightly less efficiently, way more profitably. It was only once we'd signed up to our target condition that he let us begin making improvements. And then when we got to the end of our time box, the stopwatches were out again. Right? There is no improvement if you don't have data. What is my current state? What is the economic impact of my current state? What's my target state? What's the economic impact of that? When I get real and concrete about targets and measures, things change about the way improvement works for me. So another great place to use OKRs is for improvements. This is a very common inspect and adapt item in early PIs, I find. We're getting nowhere with test automation. And we want to change something. And you can see here as we start to walk it through, well, what do we want? We want teams improving their adoption of test automation at the unit level, and we want uptake of non-automated BDD. How would we know? Well, I'd have at least one person in every team doing full TDD. I have 3 novices. Right? Got to be getting to measurable, specific. You'll notice we're not trying to solve world hunger here. We're asking ourselves the question, how far can we get in 3 months? And what can we learn from that? So some closing thoughts. You've got to build your measurement muscle. Right? Measuring stuff is hard. I know this because I've been doing Agile for 20 years, and for 20 years we've been talking about value. And 99.9% of Agile implementations in the world still don't actually measure value very well. It's easy to make up some big numbers for a business case. It's much harder to have the discipline down there at every feature. Until you practice, you don't learn. You know, I facilitate an awful lot of OKR sessions for clients. And after the 3 minutes where I explain O and KR, all of the help I'm providing is thinking of ways we could measure things. Could we measure this? Why are you doing that? How would you know if it worked? What would the measure be? Getting practiced at it, phenomenally important. But one of the things you find that's the incredible benefit of this is it flushes assumptions. Right? Unexposed assumptions are the death of collaboration. When you write an objective and you all look at the words on the objective, you think you're aligned. Usually you discover the lack of alignment after you've all left the room. Sometimes a long time after you leave the room. When you start working through your key results, it's amazing how many of those assumptions you flush. I was recently, I've just been part of setting up a Atlassian tooling company partner. We went through lean canvas for our company, spent days wrestling, locked up in a room, defining our canvas. Said, okay, let's write OKRs for the first year. And all the way through the lean canvas, it was a startup and we weren't drawing salary. That was very much part of that first year. Then we started writing key results around cash flow and cash positions. It turned out that not drawing a salary meant only drawing a notional salary to one of us, maybe drawing a salary halfway through the year to another one, and definitely not drawing a salary to a third. We'd spent days theoretically getting aligned. It wasn't until we actually started putting that number on, things happened. As a really stark reminder to me, the assumptions you find in finding the way to measure something are an incredibly valuable part of OKRs. Now, second key takeaway is you can't just set and forget. I can't tell you how many people start with OKRs in a great big workshop. Hours arguing, finding their objectives and agreeing their key results. They finish the workshop and somebody puts it in PowerPoint and files it on SharePoint. Never to be seen again. And then we get towards the end of that 3 months, because usually we're on a 3-month cycle, and we get to the end of the 3 months, and I say, well, let's plan out our OKR scoring session. And everybody goes, hey, what did we do with those again? Somebody eventually remembers where they are in SharePoint and drags them out, and then everybody looks and goes, that's embarrassing. Because they realise that the OKRs they set for themselves and what they actually did were vastly different. And they go, let's call that the practice run. We'll skip scoring. Let's set the new ones. Right? You've got to have those OKRs staring in the face all the time. Right? They're the thing that brings you back to mission. So I know for my personal OKRs, I run a weekly cycle. Sunday night, I sit down, I reflect on the week just past, I look at the week ahead, I look at my OKRs for the quarter, and I go, what can I do this week that will move me towards this quarter's OKRs? Some weeks it'll be a lot of movement, other weeks I'll know that I'm going to be busy drinking in San Diego, perhaps not so much movement. Right? It's that weekly reminder to go, hey, what am I really trying to achieve at the moment that makes a massive difference? Now, the beauty when you incorporate OKRs in an agile world is we've got all of these cadences already. Right? We've got sprints and iterations. We've got program increments. So we're already used to working in cycles. It's amazing what happens when an agile team looks at the start of each sprint. What are our OKRs? What can we do to move them this sprint? So you've got to make sure they're in your face all the time. So I've shown you a lot of places where you can use them today. Portfolio, epics, improvements, trains, features, PI objectives, personal. I've got no clients who have done everything I've just showed you. I've got clients who've done at least one of everything I've just showed you. I've seen people bring them in just at the train level. I've seen people bring them in just for features. Logically, it works together like that. If you think about the meshing alignment aspect of OKRs, being holistic about it is great. But I will guarantee you that if you tried to go tomorrow and put that model in place, you will fail. Because by the time you're finishing all of your OKRs, you'll be 3 PIs down the road, ready to find a new set. So don't try and start everywhere. But you do want to start somewhere. Now, when I'm working with organisations, usually the first place we bring them in is not actually any of this. We do leadership team OKRs. So we'll pull a leadership team together and we'll say, okay, in the world you lead, what are you trying to change? How are you going to change the system of work in the next quarter? How are you looking for your division to evolve in the next quarter? How are you looking to evolve the way that you work as a leadership team in the next quarter? It usually feels pretty safe. It's a leadership group, we're already coaching them, it's inside their sphere of influence, and they don't have to tell anybody if they don't want to, so it won't be too embarrassing. And there's a world of learning in it. But if I had a huge recommendation, there's one person we can all influence. That's ourselves. I've been using personal OKRs for 3 years. I've found them amazing. I would never have been confident to use them with a client if I hadn't used them for myself. Because when it was just my OKRs, it was all personal learning. And I would look and I'd go, gee, that was a terrible measure. Oh, that measure, that really created some anti-patterns and misbehaviour. So starting with self is great, but find an accountability partner. You've got to share your OKRs with at least somebody. I share mine with my personal trainer. It's always quite amusing. She's got me doing something where I'm incapable of breathing, and she'll ask me a question about some business objective I'm working on. Because she likes to test. If I can talk, I'm not working hard enough. But yeah, find an accountability partner. Try it for yourself. Learn from your early practice. And then pick somewhere. There's no bad place to start being more disciplined about focusing on goals, focusing on measurability, and focusing on learning. Questions? Mike's on the way.
Thank you for the session. A lot of the times people confuse OKRs with KPIs.
Yes.
So they'll set up a measure for themselves which says we want 60% in consumer satisfaction scores.
Yep.
And if they don't get there, then all hell breaks loose.
Yep.
So how do you communicate that to the leadership? That the OKR is something that's ambitious. If you can achieve it in the first go, it's not really an OKR. And if you don't achieve it, then what you need to do is think about how do you get there. So when you get that 0.72, it's not a measure of failure, because a lot of leaders would look at it that way, that, oh, we didn't get 100 on 100 out there. So how do you communicate that?
So I'm going to take that in two layers, dealing with the partial scoring versus KPIs. So if I think about partial scoring, you've got to think about the context in which you're working. So one group I worked with last year, it was a cybersecurity division for a large government agency, very complex, sensitive world. We were using OKRs in terms of their divisional strategy. And we talked about this Google notion of, aim high. And everybody in the room looked and went, no way. That's too scary in our world. The executive who ran the division looked over and said, well, we don't have to publish outside. We're using this as a tool for ourselves. We'll worry about what we publish to the external world. Let's set our aim high internally. So think about your context. Is it a context where OKRs are being operated across the entire organisation? There'll be lots of change elements helping you with partial achievement. If not, the fact that you're aiming high yourself doesn't mean you have to tell other parts of the organisation using that tool. So that's part one. Let's talk about KPIs though. Because for me, KPIs are enduring, but OKRs aren't. Right? KPI, a set of things we're trying to hold as measures. When I'm thinking about an OKR, I'm thinking about where do I want to focus moving, right? In which areas am I focusing to change my KPI performance as a whole? So it's what is an enduring measure? What's a focus measure? Two really different questions. Time? So thank you all. I'll be around the meeting hall if you want to chat.